Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Schaefer. I am the Associate Director for Graduate Student Success and Professional Development with the Graduate School. Thrilled to have you all here for our first Career Pathways session for the spring 2026 semester. Very excited to have not only this incredible professional group of panelists, but the fact that each one of these panelists are alumni of the graduate school at UTSA, and they are representing the Alvarez College of Business, the College of Liberal and Fine Arts, the College for Health, Community, and Policy, and the College for Education and Human Development. So we are running the gamut and hitting so many of our colleges. So to the panelists, thank you so much for agreeing to join us, taking time out of your busy day. Thrilled to have you here and to kind of get into some career questions with you. So let's just start with the round robin. If you could briefly describe your current role and how did you get there from graduate school? And we'll start with Rogelio.
Hi, thank y'all for having me this afternoon. Um, so currently I am a licensed master social worker with the Bexar County Military and Veteran Services, specifically peer support. Um, we're different than most of the departments in the county in that we're grant funded through the Texas Veterans Commission. So for those of y'all that are buying lottery tickets and scratch offs, please keep doing that because that's what funds me. Um, while in graduate school, my last year, I was actually under contract at San Antonio College, working in their student advocacy center. From there, I transitioned after my contract was up to the city of San Antonio, working in their homeless response team as a social worker. And then from there, actually recently, as of May of last year, transitioned to Bexar County. So that kind of, three jobs in a matter of a couple of years was what happened postgraduate, due to just the market, grants, and then I think with the city of San Antonio, that was just a job that um, was in demand at that time because of voters wanting some things done with the unsheltered situation in San Antonio. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And
Mhm.
Stephanie, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Stephanie Thornton. I'm the Senior Innovation Manager for a company called Finley's. Many of you may not have heard of Finley's, but we're the behind the scenes guys that are making all of your favorite coffee and tea products. And a fun fact about Finley's is that it was Finley's tea that was actually thrown into the Boston Tea Harbor. So it's a really old company owned by a bunch of British folks. But today we make cold brew coffee. Specifically here in San Antonio, we have the nation's largest cold brew coffee manufacturer. So my job's pretty fun. I get to play with coffee and tea and predict what's next in food and beverage. How I got here from the UTSA Master's program is I actually was a scientist before joining the Alvarez School of Business program. I used to study dead bodies, and I thought I might pursue my grad program in decomposition and microbiology. I was like, you know what? I want to go to the industry and get paid. So I decided to take a leap and exit academia for a little bit. And I started my journey at Finley's. And then I said, you know what? I really want to learn about business. So I decided to get my master's degree in business at UTSA. And with that, I was able to get a product marketing role. It was the first of its kind at Finley's and really helped build that program. And then after that, I was finally able to bridge business and science in today my senior innovation manager role.
Wonderful. Welcome, Stephanie. Patricia, you're next.
Hi there, great to see everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to alumni from UTSA. My primary role right now is at the Rocky Mountain Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and I'm specifically in the Mental Illness Research, Education, and Clinical Center for Suicide Prevention. So my primary role is to work with veteran suicide prevention, doing implementation work and quality improvement projects with hospitals in the community as well as VA, and then also working on randomized control trial. And then I'm also an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And how I got into this role or these roles is my mentor at UTSA connected me with my current supervisor at the Rocky Mountain VA Medical Center, and I graduated in May of 2022, and then started the position in June. So just making connections throughout my program was kind of how I got this position.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Zoe, you're next.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Roski. Thank you for having me. So I graduated from UTSA I got a master's and a PhD there in the Department of Anthropology. And I now work as a senior repatriation specialist at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So repatriation is just working with primarily indigenous communities to return museum objects to their communities of origin, mostly working with groups from North America under sort of US federal law, but doing a little bit of international work as well, just sort of per museum policy rather than federal law. And how I came to this career point from where I started, I was an archaeologist. I did archaeology research under Kat Brown and Jason Yeager in the anthropology department, working in Belize. Did a bit of sort of museum studies work at UTSA as well. I was there a long time. So I worked at the Institute of Texan Cultures while I was in grad school as well. And then after, or right before, around the time I graduated, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where I worked for about 5 years in the private sector for archaeology, which does exist. So doing contract archaeology, sort of like gun for hire work with working with a lot of federal agencies, other sort of governmental entities, as well as tribes. And so this role kind of brings all of that together in a museum context.
Thank you and welcome. And last but not least, Kendra.
Everyone, thank you for having me, John. I am a licensed professional counselor associate, and I work in a private practice. It was pretty much my intended job right out of grad school. I I graduated in 23, May of 23, I think. I was actually having to go back and look. I'm like, was it 22? Was it 23? It all blurs together at this point. But yeah, I took my licensing exam, which UTSA helped me set up, and then I applied directly from jobs from there. Like once I got licensed and credentialed, and kind of went from there. So now I work in a private practice, and I've been here ever since.
Wonderful. Again, thank you all for joining me. These sessions that I do for the Career Pathways guest speaker series are always such a thrill because we work really hard to get our alumni back versus just random guest speakers from wherever. And I do want to, on the record, do a shout out to our colleges, all the colleges that are represented here, who assisted me in identifying interested alumni that they would like to see come back. So all of these people have been recommended by staff and faculty and administrators to be here today. So again, thank you to the colleges and thank you to our panelists. So let's start off with the first question, and I'm going to throw this to Patricia. What key decisions or experiences most shaped your career trajectory after graduate school?
Yes. So I went when I entered graduate school, I went to become a professor. I'd had a previous career of 20 years before coming to UTSA in teaching, and I was a adjunct professor at a college as well. And so that was kind of my goal, is just get my PhD, become a professor. But I also kind of reminded myself to keep an open mind because, sometimes you don't know what options there are once you kind of get into a certain area. And so I kept an open mind to explore other options. And then once I delved into research, I really just enjoyed learning to design studies, to answer research questions, and then to conduct data analysis. Learning about research design and implementation to systematically answer just real world problems was really exciting to me. And so I started to just look for other opportunities and kind of, that I can go into teaching anytime, but I really wanted to kind of hone in on this research experience. And so that's kind of how I got my current position, is just with that interest of research.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to pop over to Stephanie. Same question. Like, what experiences shaped your career trajectory to where you are now?
Sure, I think it all began in my undergrad, and similar to Patricia, I was very interested in research. So I really enjoy designing experiments. Really love the science facet of my career journey. And so when I mentioned to you all, I was studying decomposition, microbiology, and I needed to make a leap for myself. So financially, I just needed to really start bringing in some income that could support myself just due to my circumstances. So I decided to enter the industry and I applied to all kinds of jobs. And I did land some interviews with some microbiology companies, but I actually stumbled across Finley's. And so it was really, I looked at the environment of that space and it was just so inviting. Everyone was so passionate about coffee and tea, and you might catch on that I'm the same way. I haven't left in over 11 years the coffee and tea space, and so that really is what kickstarted all my passion into what I'm doing today. And so that's where the seed was planted. It's all my undergrad. And then as you all heard me mention, I did science role when I started at Finley's. And so I was doing product development. I was actually doing quality assurance. And then I had that desire to learn more about business. I was lacking that business acumen. And so that's what got my interest to go and apply for my master's in business at UTSA. And it was actually families that supported and funded that program. So I feel very fortunate to find an employer that does that. And I encourage all of you to do the same. And thanks to getting that master's degree, again, I was able to take on a product marketer role and really gain a lot of experience there. And then now am leading a global innovation program to help bring to life new things like botanicals and refreshers. Like, what is Gen Alpha and Gen Z drinking? And that's really how it all started. Was that just that seed and curiosity and science that then brought in business?
Thank you so much. Kendra, we're going to pop over to you, and I'd like to know what did your actual graduate school experience? How did that train you for what you're doing? But then what weren't you prepared for that you just had to learn kind of on the job?
Absolutely. So, I would say the actual counseling skills that are necessary to be a licensed professional counselor, UTSA helped me a lot with. I had some naivety going into it, right? Like I had gotten, I mean, it might sound a little arrogant, I don't intend it to, but like I had gotten compliments from friends or family members of like, wow, like you're so easy to talk to, or like you really know how to listen, you know how to help me feel better. And so I just kind of thought, I was like, well, like, what is there really to it? Like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be a counselor, and I'm going to help people with their problems. And I had no idea how much really went into it, or the stuff on the back end, like how you have to write progress notes. And if you choose to build to insurance, which I had wanted to, so thankfully I'm in part of a practice that I can give, access to people who don't have the budget to seek services private pay. But anyway, so the actual counseling skills and the ethical skills that were necessary to do my job, not just winging it and like going off vibes, um, was something that UTSA was able to really help me with. And also with that, I mean, kind of like what other panelists have said so far is like interest in research. I also had interest in research. I was part of a research lab, both in undergrad at UTSA and in grad school. And though I don't engage in it day to day with my job, it's something that I still assist UTSA professors with on the back end. And so that has taught me, graduate school taught me that a lot of like quantitative data, qualitative data, things of all of that nature. Now, in terms of on the job that I had to learn was really a lot of like clinical crisis management, and it tested certain ethical dilemmas, not just in theory, but in practice. A an interesting story that I feel like I can share is that very soon after graduation, getting my job, I was talking like 2 months. I had someone who could come into my office, very first time seeing them, and they detailed a plot of how they wanted to assassinate a presidential candidate. And I was like, oh my goodness, I could not believe it. I was like, am I actually hearing this? And that was something that while we went in somewhat detail in my ethical courses of like, okay, how do you handle this? Like, what does Texas law say, et cetera, et cetera. It was something that I was not immediately prepared for right out of school on how to handle. That was one of the biggest ethical, not really dilemmas because it was really pretty clear cut, but ethical problems that I was presented with to date in my career and happened right out of grad school. And so that's kind of one of the funny anecdotes that I think like to share. And thankfully everything ended up being fine and intervention was made and everyone was kept safe. But yeah, in terms of like intense crisis management was something that you can't really know how to do until you're actually on the job and learn how to do it.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that very interesting story. Zoe, same question. Like in anthropology, what were you well prepared for, and what did you have to learn kind of out in the field on the job?
So I think just to echo some of what the other panelists have said, I feel like I developed a really strong foundation in research and conducting research and writing. And I always, like to say that I've gotten very good at learning things after being in school for so long. And so I think that set me up well for both my career in the private sector and this work as well, and would be applicable to an academic career. So I think it taught me really how to sort of sit down, filter through information, process the information, produce reports, produce whatever the output is, but to sort of take in information, think about it critically, and present that information either in a written format or in a verbal oral format as well. I think it also really prepared me to do sort of project planning and project management. A lot of the stuff is really directly applicable in terms of grant applications can easily become those exact skills transfer right over to bidding on projects as a consultant and putting together proposals and managing field crews in the same way that I managed my dissertation and field work in graduate school. And so I think a lot of that prepared me really well. But one thing that I will sort of say to everyone who asks me, and every time I do one of these things, is that I think that a lot of just academic programs, as a rule, prepare you to be an academic, especially getting a PhD. And so we had a great, teaching anthropology course in our department that I took, and I think would have been really useful had I taught anthropology after graduation. But I think this sort of the legal frameworks of how anthropology and archaeology are done in the United States, and I guess just more the sort of mundane run-of-the-mill day-to-day stuff, as well as the sort of more technical things, are just not something that is taught. And maybe it's harder to teach, but there are certain federal laws that essentially are the reason that many working archaeologists are able to be working archaeologists in the United States, and that's just not something that you are taught about and yet it actually is sort of the main driving thing behind this entire industry of both private sector and even what I do. I'm in a museum context, but in some ways it's sort of a compliance role. It's not it's not a curatorial position. It's sort of a compliance role working with federal laws that are just not something that we really dig into in an academic program.
Thank you so much for that insight. Rogelio, we're going to bounce over to you. In your work as a social worker, what ethical challenges are most common, and how do you navigate them in like real world situations?
Good question. So as social workers, one of the things, we get into the field, it's like we're here to save the world, and the world doesn't want to be saved. So part of that is our boundaries, right? That's the biggest ethical issues I find, where I got to check myself, but also other social workers that I work with in different fields, right? Is boundaries. That's the biggest thing, because there's a line that, as social workers, that we don't cross. We don't want to cross, right? We have a rule of ethics that we follow, right? To make sure that we're not favoring clients one over the other, right? That we're not trying to get things for ourselves when they should be for clients, right? So it's a lot of that navigating that we have to do, and always checking ourselves and just relying on what we've learned, right? So I'll give you an example of the boundaries as part of my job entails me working in the county jail 2 days out of the week, right? So I'm there as a visitor, as a volunteer for the county, but I'm also there to do my job as a social worker. So it's making sure that I'm not crossing those boundaries when they say, "Hey, can you get a note to my family outside?" Or "Can you call my lawyer for me?" Right? As much as a social worker in me would want to say that yes, I can do that, ethically I can't, because of the laws that the jail has, the rules that they have. So those are kind of where I'm at. That's one of the big. That's probably the closest example I can give with the boundaries part. Boundaries is the biggest thing that I think for social workers across the board, we run into that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I want to bounce back over to Kendra because the roles are different, but they're also somewhat similar. So what are the differences between like counseling and what Rogelio was describing as far as like everyday ethical challenges and how you navigate them?
That's a good question. So there is a lot of overlap, and that was something that I think I hadn't really realized until I got into the career. Because I was thinking that like social work, they had their lane, and counselors, they had their lane. And that is true to an extent. But like I've seen a lot of social workers operate in what I had previously thought was like a counselor type capacity. So it made me even scratch my head of what is the real difference here? And from my understanding, and so Rogelio, if I'm wrong here, if you can give other insight, please correct me, is that it has to do with the model that we're based off of. So like counselors have a wellness model, psychologists, they have a medical model. I'm not entirely sure what the model is of social workers, but I think it to be different than a wellness. Yeah, Rogelio's confirming that. So some of that is kind of just like the theoretical background of how we conduct our jobs. But in terms of like the ethical impacts, so, and I'm sure Rogelio has this too, but not a risk, but like a common ethical thing that we have to deal with as counselors is being mandated reporters. And if you didn't know, I've learned recently that Texas law has updated where every citizen is a mandated reporter. So just throwing that out there as a very interesting update that nobody actually ever knows about. But yeah, counselors were mandated reporters. And so that sometimes means that we have to betray people's trust and report child abuse, report abuse of a vulnerable adult, to call the Bexar County Sheriff's Office when someone is making threats against a presidential candidate, which then gets escalated to Secret Service, which is something that I did not have on my bingo card for life, is to be interviewed by Secret Service. And then having a risk of being sued, because the reality is that if you report something, a person in Texas could sue you for it. And while Texas is really good about protecting the license, in my opinion, is really good about protecting the license of the professional, it's still a risk. Nobody wants to go to court, but a person you could. Thankfully, that's never happened. I've never had to go to court because I had to report something. But I would say that's a very common ethical thing that we have to deal with, is knowing who we have to report to, for what instances do we have to make a report, and kind of how to do so, and knowing that it's probably going to rupture the relationship that you have, but you have to choose to do it anyway, even if you're not 100% sure about what is going on, because as counselors, our job is not to investigate if there is actually abuse or not, but it's to make a report so that way those who can do the investigations, if there is suspicion of abuse being held.
Perfect. Thank you. Stephanie, let's go over to you. I'd like to know, in your field, some of the major trends or changes that graduate students who might be interested in going into a business, marketing, should be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Generational behaviors are absolutely critical to staying ahead of what's going to happen next. So, really monitoring the growing buying power of the future generations is how you can stay ahead in a for profit industry. And so, some key examples in the coffee and tea space that might be relevant to you all is in 2010, millennials started having more spending power, and cold brew coffee really came in hot to the scene. It's now mature and it actually is starting to decline. Coffee in general, coffee consumption on general Gen Alpha and Gen Z's is declining surprisingly and being replaced by alternatives such as tea refreshers. So Gen Alphas really like this. So we're studying and doing social listening on what is causing this. And really, what we learned is it's social media is really driving behavioral shifts. So, studying technology and seeing how it's impacting our youth is really going to allow you in a for profit space to predict those behavioral shifts. And so, using social media, we notice things need to look beautiful. And so, right now, vibrant colors are trending amongst the youth. That's why they like The refreshers, matcha is huge right now, not because matcha is healthy for you, but because it's green. So that's what, a little insight we have is they're really not drinking it for the health halo. They're drinking it because it's beautiful on Instagram. And so we monitor those behaviors through social listening. We do sensory panels to hear from the youth. So that way, again, we can create products that people actually want as they start maturing and being able to spend the dollar.
The generational piece is very interesting, and I'm sure it's something that's very common. Like, is your each new generation and how you market to them, how you grab them for what they're with their interest in your product. Zoe, the same question. What major trends or changes are happening in the anthropology field?
I feel like my contribution is so niche to this, but I do think, in the same way, especially working for an institution that's been around since the 1800s, the sort of public perception of anthropology as a whole has really changed, and the future directions of anthropology as a whole, and like this sort of old school colonialist view of the world where you go out and record these sort of like primitive cultures and all of the sort of foundational feel of anthropology has really shifted dramatically. And I think that's reflected in the sort of work that I do and the sort of work that our curators do and that our institution's trying to work towards. And so it was previously sort of a very outsider perspective of cultures and communities from a Western, authoritative academic perspective that has really become much more, at least intended to be much more collaborative and much more working with communities. So, for instance, they recently, on the curatorial side of the museum, they recently redid the whole Northwest Coast Hall. And that was done with direct, ongoing, multi-year input from Northwest Coast tribes, the Haida, the Tlingit, and they built these really great working relationships with them to sort of facilitate telling their own stories in these spaces. And we even have contemporary art spaces that we have Indigenous artists do rotating exhibits in and things like that. And from the sort of other cultures perspective, we have halls that were just sort of closed, both in compliance with these federal regulations, but also just reflecting that the way that the information is being presented and sort of othering these communities is not really how we, as an institution, as a society, want to proceed, right? And so it's a really time-consuming and elaborate process to re-envision how we can tell these stories and how we can meaningfully engage community members with telling their own stories and reclaiming portions of their stories that they are not interested in having on public display. So that's sort of largely where I come in is, and I'll touch on that ethics and impact question a little bit because I do think it's really quite relevant to what I do. So just a little side note of the repatriation work can involve objects and sort of items, cultural items, but it largely stemmed from a law passed in the 1990s called the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act that was mainly targeted at returning human remains. So archaeologists who excavated burials, Native American burials, the goal is that those individuals, those ancestors should be returned home to their communities of origin. So obviously it's a tense territory to be sort of grappling with the sort of history of the discipline and history of this institution, which is one of the sort of founding institutions, and it's been around a long time and has a lot of skeletons in the closet, literally and metaphorically, right? So I think it's moving towards a much less colonialist, imperial Western thought perspective, and moving much more towards respectful collaboration and Indigenous community involvement and self-determination and self-representation.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah. Patricia, let's pop over to you. In your area, in your field, what helps you maintain motivation, boundaries, and well-being in emotionally or intellectually demanding job?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually something that I've actually talked to my kids about and my friends recently. Actually, last week I was on a vacation with a friend. Took a few days off from work and we actually had this conversation. But I work with suicide prevention, veteran suicide prevention. So that is a very heavy topic that, every day we're working on, ways to prevent suicide. And so one of the things that I do is I try to like do something where I can find some joy every day. Just something, and it could be something for 5 minutes, but like every day I like to look back and think, okay, like did I have joy for, like, what did I do today to have joy? And it could be calling my kids, it could be going for a walk, it could be having dinner with a friend. I mean, little things. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose or a vacation. And I know, like, when I was in graduate school, kind of a perfectionist, and I would kind of get bogged down in just getting started on all the projects I had to do, because I wanted to make sure they were right. And so then I would end up kind of like wasting time. And so that's kind of where this kind of mindset came from, was just I started setting aside time on the weekends where I would just do something fun, and then I would work, during the day with the other time that I had. But then that made just such a difference. And so I've kind of, with my career, just kept that mentality of just, doing something every day where I can, lay back, just kind of like kick back or do something, whatever it is you enjoy. Just, keeping those hobbies or exercise, spending time with friends and family and loved ones. So
Thank you. And I'm gonna pop over to Rogelio because I know that in social work there are caseloads and so same question to you is how do you maintain the motivation, boundaries, and well-being in this emotionally demanding work?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is a part of the job I hate, is that I get a county phone that I get to take home with me. It's a county phone, it's my work phone, and um, I make sure I don't look at it after work. So it gets pushed to the corner. My clients, my my neighbors, that's what I call them. My neighbors are my clients. My friends, that I'm working with, they know not to call at a certain time because that's pre-established, right? Um, that's one of the biggest boundaries with regards to phone. So once I get home, that phone gets pushed to the side, right? Um, but overall, and it's gonna sound kind of cliche, but really, my wife, my family, my faith, those three things kind of help me stay grounded with this type of work. Because my wife also does um, work in the sphere of homeless response. She's an executive director at Cub Communities Under the Bridge, and so that in itself can be very taxing, right? So um, it's really just maintaining ourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, um, because it can be taxing, right? And more so that I'm in the jail 2 days out of the week working with justice involved veterans. You know, we do a class with them, so it's hearing them go through their stories of what they went through as well. So really just trying to keep myself grounded those ways, and then try to stay connected as much as possible, because yeah, it can be demanding emotionally as well. And uh, the one thing that I started to do that I should have done a long time ago was, as a social worker, but I don't think anybody needs it, is counseling. Finding myself in counseling, because the helper sometimes needs help, right? And in order for us to be able to pour out, we need to kind of replenish that liquid love that we have in us. So yeah.
And that actually segues right back over to Kendra because I wanted to ask one slightly off follow-up with counseling. So my sister is a product of the UTSA counseling program. She did counseling for a number of years. She did more on the side of the social work versus the private counseling. But she got burned out and she ended up now in higher education administration, following in the footsteps of her big brother, and has been doing that for years. Kendra, how do you leave your clients? How do you leave them at work when you go home to your life outside of work?
Yes, it was something that was extremely hard for me to do, at least the first 9 months. And probably like 4 or 5 months into it, my husband would start to like complain, if you will. He'd be like, "You are exhausted and you don't have any emotional energy for anybody else at the house." And I'm like, yeah, I know, I really don't, because I'm giving it all to my clients. Like I have to be emotionally present for them. Um, and so I didn't have anything left over. Like I was spent. And I quickly realized, like, okay, this isn't going to be sustainable for me. If I am 9 months out of graduation and into my quote unquote big girl job, I can't do this like this for the next 35 years. So I had to develop a very strict self-care regimen. And I'm not always the perfect, I don't always follow it perfectly, but I tried really hard. So finding some sort of exercise, I like what Rogelio said, right? Like family, faith, things like that, is really helpful for me. I also have like ongoing consultation with trusted peers. That way I can kind of have like a sense of accountability. And something that I needed was to shorten my day a little bit, because I used to work, I'd be like, wow, like all the clients are like, everyone works like a 9 to 5, right? It's like I need to be available after 5, and I need to be present when people need me there. And so I'd be getting home at like 8:30 and I would just be exhausted. I was like, okay, no, I have to adjust my day. So I don't see anybody after 5. And that has been huge for me. Like I actually get to be home for dinner. Sometimes I make dinner. I don't like making dinner, but sometimes I make dinner. And things like that. So structuring my day strategically. I've also made it a point now to not have any more than 2 high intensity clients in one day, and never back to back. Now you can't always predict this, right? Anyone could go into crisis at any time, but you typically get a pretty good indication after an intake where someone's going to be. And so I can tell myself, like, okay, well, I know I have this client on Mondays at this time, and the one I just had is going to be a lot of work too. So I don't want them to be right after my Monday 11 a.m. client, or whatever we want to call it. So trying to strategically structure my day, that way I can have a little bit of breathing room. There are clients that are easier than others. So having like a really hard client, and then having an easier client, and then I can go into having maybe another harder client, was a big help for me. That way I'm not coming home at the end of every day just utterly exhausted and emotionally spent.
Thank you so much. We're going to do one more round robin with all the panelists. And this is for advice for our students, for our graduate students. What is one concrete piece of advice you would give graduate students preparing to enter the workforce, but specifically your area of the workforce? And we'll start with Rogelio.
Okay, so for me, I think I have three pieces of advice rolled in one, from a social work lens. Because with social work, you can do a lot of jobs, right? And that's the one thing why I did social work. Um, Besides a Facebook post I put out before entering the school, that's another story. But um, don't have high expectations of others. Build your network and build your skill set, right? Your skill set, network are very transferable. The high expectations of others is that way you don't let yourself down. Um, come in knowing what you know, but continue to grow. Yeah, that's what I would tell anyone.
Thank you. Stephanie, same question to you. Advice.
Sure. So in the for-profit space or nonprofit, wherever you work, what I found that's really gotten me out of my when I really struggled with work-life balance is really actually maintaining your inner child. I feel like that's what allows us to really be energized, be passionate, and never losing sight of that curiosity that our inner child has. And one thing I've done is like really maintain the hobbies that some of the panelists had mentioned, Patricia, like doing hobbies outside of your job that pays you and just doing something strictly for fun that allows you to connect with others. It allows me to maintain my sense of community, my sense of self, because corporate is heavy sometimes and burdensome, and then just life is heavy. And so I really try to protect that inner child and make sure I'm having fun, I'm able to laugh, and I've been able to really that maintaining that has really allowed me to maintain my work life balance. And if I do lose sight of that, I know something is getting off the rails in my life. So my one piece of advice is really try to protect the inner child and do something fun for yourself where you can find joy, laugh with others, and find community.
Thank you. Awesome. Patricia.
Okay. Yeah, that's I love that, Stephanie. So yeah, I would say you have to start somewhere. So whenever you're looking for jobs, I know this isn't the best job market in the at this current moment, but every job is a growth experience. So if you don't land your perfect job, that you anticipated right out of graduate school, but it's something that you can grow and learn something from, then that may be okay. That is a stepping stone to something else. It doesn't have to be the dream job right out the gate. That'd be great. Maybe that'll happen. But the job market's tough. So just learn all you can and seek all the growth opportunities that you can when you're in that position, and then kind of piggybacking off of I think Rogelio said about building your network. So if you whatever job you have, just build that network and just make connections with people too.
Thank you. And Zoe.
So just sort of building off what Patricia said, and also she said earlier, which I think is relevant, is sort of just keep an open mind and really diversify. I never went to school for the job I had now, but the various different jobs I had in between actually came together in a really kind of kismet way. And it's an incredible job, and I love my job. And I applied as an unpaid intern to work in this museum my entire undergraduate career, and I never even got an unpaid internship. And then I was able to come in a senior role where they moved me across the country for this job because of these various disparate other sort of random jobs that I had along the way. And related to that, learn how to sort of not only build these different disparate skills, but also learn how to market those skills and how to position yourself when you're applying to these roles. Don't leave it to the person interviewing you or looking at applications to understand how these puzzle pieces fit together. Learn how to really paint a clear picture of how these diverse experiences make you the right person for this specific role.
Thank you. And finally, Kendra.
So mine it's kind of like two wrapped into one. It has a similar theme. The first is to get comfy, and the second is to never be comfy. So kind of what a lot of people have said is networking. So get comfy with LinkedIn and with networking. That was a big growth area for me, but I think it's really important. And like today, I mean, so Patricia, we actually knew each other from 2019, and now we're going to connect afterwards. We happened to work in a research lab together when I was an undergrad. And so like that's something that's really cool. And now we're going to get to like rekindle this networking thing from something that we've previously knew each other at. So yeah, networking is really important. Stuff like LinkedIn can be really important. So making sure to get comfy with that. And then on the flip side, to never get comfy with thinking that you know enough. Being a forever student, you as high as you may get in your career field in different roles and things like that, there's still always something to learn. So just kind of being good at being, yeah, like I said, a forever student, being eager to take in research and knowledge and things like that, because that's always a good skill set to have that can be transferable pretty much across all sectors.
Thank you. And I like that a few of you talked about transferable skills. So my takeaways from this, first of all, when I started to do the research, because this session was specifically requested by the graduate school dean, and she just said, John, these sessions you do are great. Behavioral sciences, that's what I want to see. And so when I started doing research, of course, when you think about behavioral science, at least on the offset, it's more my mind went to immediately psychology and counseling. And then as I did research, realizing, oh, we're running into business marketing, we're running into anthropology, of course, social work, that totally makes sense. So that's my one takeaway is behavioral sciences is a very wide career area. And as you know, as our people, our audience has seen a wealth of opportunities and a wealth of experience here. Speaking of that, the other takeaway is I realized after listening to everyone and their background on the panel that we could do a whole separate panel on the sociological, business, counseling, psychology, anthropological impact of the show Heated Rivalry on HBO Max. And I think that'd be very interesting. But if anyone just got like excited, we're not doing that. I really truly appreciate you all for joining us. I loved listening to you, and I hope all of our audience did as well. For those of you still in the room, other than the panelists, I did pop a session survey link into the chat. We are not an office where we just say, fill out our survey and and we don't do anything with it. We are actually very data driven, and we have an entire team that looks at our data for our sessions for future improvement and adjustments. So I would encourage you all to do that. And now I'm going to stop the recording and open it up to questions.